The charitable definition or explanation is a missed opportunity. I think the less charitable definition is a disaster. And I say that for a couple of reasons. So the Ukraine war for Georgia was sort of the crucible. It was the test of its geopolitical affiliation, its geopolitical transition, of its Western integration. It was an opportunity to remind the world that Georgia was invaded in 2008 by Russia, and to sort of pull Georgia and Ukraine together in the minds of Georgia's partners so that Georgia's partners remember that Georgia is also a victim of Russian aggression. And so I believe the government missed that opportunity, and instead it started a war of words with the Ukrainian government. It accused the West of trying to drag it into the war with Ukraine. Formal support for Ukraine from the Georgian government has been very limited. Informal support from the Georgian people has been incredible, probably one of the highest in terms of per capita support in the world. Georgia, the government is sitting out the sanctions, is not enforcing the sanctions on Russia. The resumption of direct flights between Georgia and Russia, all these things lead to the perception, or can lead to the perception on the part of Georgia's partners that it's not serious about its Euro-Atlantic integration, even though huge majorities of the Georgian people are and say consistently in surveys and polls that they believe that Georgia belongs in and should be part of the Euro-Atlantic community, NATO, the European Union. But it can lead to the perception that the government is sitting on the fence and trying to see how the war is going to turn out before it decides whether it wants to continue with its Euro-Atlantic integration or turn in a different direction. And I think sort of the very recent announcement that Russia, well, the announcement from the de facto government in Abkhazia that Russia plans to open a naval base in Ochamchira should be a wake-up call for the Georgian government, that there is no long-term rapprochement with Russia. There is no way to have a pragmatic relationship with Russia. Russia is going to continue to subvert Georgia's security interests, to subvert its economic interests. And so I would hope that that would cause the Georgian government to step back and recalibrate or reorient its response to the Ukraine war and become more supportive of Ukraine and more supportive of the package of Western responses to the war in Ukraine. Right, so this is the strategic partnership agreement recently signed between Georgia and China. So I think, on the one hand, it's a hedge by the Georgian government. It's an insurance policy against the Western aid and Western support for Georgia being cut off because of the perception that Georgia has reoriented itself more toward the east or the north, more toward Russia, more toward China. So China can provide some of those tangible economic benefits that Georgia could lose if the European Union and the United States start to decrease the amount of aid to Georgia, and trade between Georgia and the EU starts to decline. And also there's the perception among a lot of countries that have strategic partnerships with China that Chinese aid comes with no strings, right? There are not requirements for any corruption. There are not requirements for democratic governments, human rights, respect for human rights. The labor standards aren't an issue. Environmental standards, all those things that make Western aid more expensive in the short term. Of course, the Chinese strings are hidden, and they come over the longer term, and they come in the form of Chinese leverage and even coercion over Georgian government, foreign and domestic policy. And so that's a potential risk with this strategic partnership with China. So I'm looking at Russian-Chinese relations in 4 regions of the world: Africa, Central Asia, Eastern Europe, especially in the context of the war in Ukraine, and East Asia. And I would say that among those 4 areas, if there's going to be a rupture between Russia and China, it is most likely to come in Central Asia for several reasons. One, that's a region of the world, it's the backyard for both, it's between them. It's a region of the world where they both have what I would consider important, if not vital, security interests at stake, or national interest, not just security, also economic interest, diplomatic interests. And so it's also a region, though, where there's a very, very fast, precipitous transition in power underway, where Russian power especially since the invasion of Ukraine, has fallen quickly in the eyes of many Central Asians. Russia has lost power, authority, and legitimacy. Chinese power has continued to grow, and it's continued to grow at a pretty steady pace, primarily economic, but also now security or military power. China has a base in Tajikistan, its first base in Central Asia. China is likely to become more interested in security there in directly, either through private security companies or possibly the deployment of its own military, is likely to become more interested in maintaining security in Central Asia for a couple of reasons. One, to protect its economic investments there, which are significant. It was Central Asia. Kazakhstan was where Xi Jinping announced the Belt and Road Initiative in 2013. It was where he took his first post-COVID foreign visit in September of 2022, just over a year ago. And then the question is, how do China and Russia manage the fall in Russian power and the rise of Chinese power in the context of a region where they both have really important interests at stake? And the U.S. footprint, the U.S. presence, the Western presence in general is very light. So if we were in Central Asia in a big way, there's an argument that would drive Russia and China together because of the shared resistance to the U.S. The United States is not really a player in Central Asia, so it remains to be seen whether that will induce them to compete in the absence of the U.S. I use that 3 C's, whether the relationship was cooperative, compartmented, or competitive in some other writing I had done. Actually, for China and Russia, for this project, I've added a 4th C, which I'm calling complementary. So by cooperative, I mean they formally coordinate their activities in a certain country or region so that they cooperate. Complementary is, and I think that's what's happening here. There's no formal coordination, but each is aware of what the other is doing in a specific country or region and structures its activities to either complement those or at least not get in the way of them. And so what I think you're seeing here in Georgia is Chinese interests are primarily economic in terms of Belt and Road projects and strategic connectivity. Russian interests are primarily security and diplomatic. And so the two of them are aware of what the other is doing and are structuring their activities so that they either are complementary or at least don't get in the way of each other. And so I think this strategic partnership now that you've seen between Georgia and China is an example of that. I don't think there's any security element to it. It doesn't compete with Russian interest in the South Caucasus, but it's an attempt to diplomatically and economically strengthen China's position.